And it's long not just in pages, but it's long also in how much of it we need to read. Okay? Let's set it up. We are journeying through the life and times of the Shvatim. Right? The title of this year's Sichos class is Yosef and his brothers. We started with Yosef being sold into slavery. We started with Yosef suffering in slavery. We started with Yosef managing Golus perfectly. He figured out what Golus is, and he figured out how to react to it. And as a consequence, he experienced what I love to call Vahimi Kates. When it got as bad as it could possibly get, it suddenly became as good as it could possibly get. He negotiated Golus into almost a Geula state for himself personally. The Shvatim were more resistant, they were more difficult. They also experienced such a moment. This is, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, V'layachal Yosef Lihisapak l'chol haritzavim alav. Yosef exposes himself to his brothers, and the worst situation becomes the best situation in an instant. Yaakov Avinu had the same moment, the same experience, which was represented in last week's class by Dani Yosef Ha'oida V'chai. Is my father still alive? What's the next thing on the agenda? Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, and he says, "Run home, run home." Why run home? Yaakov suffered for 22 years. I don't know how he even managed, but he shouldn't suffer for an instant more. Now, girls, understand this theologically. In other words, this is a story. It's an event that happened actually in real time. This story happened. But we're not learning the story because of its historic relevance, but because we see this as Torah, which means to say it's timeless. The issue on the table is Golus. Golus means in ideal worlds. You're living in a world where what is real is hidden. What is real is that the Eibishter is in the world and that there is a direct governance of God in His world. You can see God both in good and in bad as a direct reaction to what we do and so on. In Golus, everything is convoluted, confused. And the story is a story of Yosef managing Golus, the Shvatim managing Golus, and Yaakov Avinu managing Golus. All of them have experienced their Vahimi Kates. All of them have reached the bottom and have, in effect, gone out of Golus. Now, what's going to happen because of this? The Golus is going to begin in earnest. It's strange. It's ironic. Yeah, Yosef graduates from Golus. The Shvatim graduate from Golus. Yaakov Avinu graduates from Golus, and now they're coming to Egypt. Because they're setting up what we will call a third Golus. The first Golus was Yaakov's Golus. That's Vayetze and Vayishlach. The second Golus is the children's Golus. Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigish, Vayichi. The third Golus is going to be hell. Mitzrayim, right? Shmais, Va'eda, the descendants of the Shvatim. And the Torah tells us these stories because each of these stories is real. There's a Jew on the level of Yaakov who experiences Golus as he experiences Golus. There are Jews on the level of Yosef and his brothers who experience Golus on the level that they experience Golus. And then there's regular people like me and you who experience Golus on a third level. The Torah tells us these stories because these stories are going to happen over and over again in our history, and you have to know the story. You have to know what Golus is, you have to know how to react to the Golus, you have to know how the Golus ends, and so forth and so on. That's why this is Torah. That's why this is timeless. That's why we learn this. That's why we take it so seriously. That's why we believe it. Not only because of its historic worth, or to a very limited degree because of its historic worth. But where are we holding in the story? We're holding in a story where all of the principles have been redeemed. Yosef is redeemed, the brothers are redeemed, and Yaakov is redeemed. The redemption of Yosef is represented by the words Vahimi Kates. The redemption of the brothers is represented by V'layachal Yosef Lisapak V'yemer Etziu Kolishmi Aloi. Everybody out. And Yaakov is redeemed when Yosef HaTzadik says, Ha'oida V'chai. Is my father still alive? They come home. Their instructions are, bring him here quickly. Now bring him here quickly means the quicker he gets here, the sooner his galus ends. As it turns out, it may be true that the quicker he gets it, the sooner his galus ends, but the quicker he gets it, the sooner his galus ends, the sooner his grandchildren's galus begins. But no one tells you that, right? The story, as we read it in the Chumash, it's such a happy ending. It's such a great story. I didn't grow up with television. I really didn't grow up reading novels. I couldn't read English till I was 10. So when I learned this story, this was an incredible piece of drama. I must have been 5 or 6. But it's so upsetting. It's so sad. When we were little kids, we were too young to even appreciate how catastrophic it is that a bunch of boys ganged up on their little brother and sold him into slavery. We couldn't even tell how bad that is. Okay, you sold him slavery. It's like, like you're locking your brother out of the house. You're going to let him in 15 minutes. Yosef HaTzadik was let in 22 years. That's just 15 minutes, 22 years, just a matter of quantity. And then he reveals himself. They find him. He reveals himself. And Yaakov comes to his time. And it's really, really one of those. And they lived happily ever after. Right? Not exactly. So it's an amazing story. It really is an incredible drama. Who would have thunk their brother spends 13 years in a dungeon, in a prison? He gets himself out of prison and he's elevated to the highest position in the land, except for the king himself. He's running the country and his brothers run into him and don't even know it's him. And he plays a game with them for whatever reasons. Finally, the game is up and he says, I should really kill all of you. I should just be done with you. You wanted to kill me, but I'm a nice guy. I'm going to keep you alive. I'm going to respect you, and I'm going to honor you, and I'm going to love you. And in the words of the Tanya, I'm going to pay good for bad. Bring your father here. Let him enjoy this, and bring him here quick. And Yaakov goes. Now Rashi does say that Yaakov hesitates. Yaakov is afraid to leave Eretz Yisrael. And Hashem says, go. First of all, for you it'll be good. Yosef, Yoshis, Yadi Alinach. And second of all, there's destiny here. This has to happen. There's destiny here. For you it'll be good. I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen after you die. But there's destiny here. Go. And he goes. In between those two events, in between the time that Yosef tells his brothers, run home and bring your brother back, and the time Yaakov arrives in Egypt, a number of things take place. Of course, we all learned in Chumash Rashi that Yaakov doesn't believe. They got set up by Sasha, who was a young girl, to sing and to say, Yosef, Yosef Chai. And the pasuk says, "Vayofag libe kiloihem and lahem." His heart stops. He couldn't believe them. And after they got this little girl to present the possibility to him through innuendo, through suggestion, they say, "No, it's true." And they bring proof. All kinds of proof. They bring gifts. And they bring proof. Part of the proof is Vayadas HaGolis. He saw the wagons. And this is one of those weird word games that the Torah plays that nobody ever notices. The Hebrew word for Agolis is wagons. It so happens that Eglah, besides for meaning a wagon, also means a calf. A cow, a little cow. It's the same Oisius, Aleph Gimel Lamed, same Shadish. So he sees the Agolah, he sees these wagons, and the brothers say, Yosef sent you Agolis. And he sent you Agolis as a hint that when you and him parted company 22 years before, the last halacha we learned together was the law of Eglah Aruf, which means chopping off the head of a calf, which I'll explain momentarily. My recollection is that it says in Sfarim that Yaakov Avinu sent his son Yosef off to look for his brothers. Remember that? Yeah. And he accompanied him. He walked with him part of the way. And as they were walking, they were talking. Look, we just left the city. We're out in the field. So Yaakov says to Yosef, I want to teach you a halacha that's relevant to people leaving cities and going out into the field. And the halacha is that if you find a dead person, murdered, out in the field, and you cannot identify the murderer, so there is a certain amount of indirect liability on the people of the city that he left. They didn't kill him, but they allowed him to leave and to be in a vulnerable place. They didn't protect him, and as a consequence, he was murdered out in the field. They have to atone. The atonement really is Yadeinu leishavchas adam hazeh ve'einenu leiro. We didn't spill this blood and we didn't see, but we apologize for permitting this kind of an event to occur in a field around our city. Yaakov is saying this to Yosef innocently. And they're walking in a field, and by the way, now little does Yaakov know, he's never going to see him again. As far as he's concerned, his son experienced precisely what it was that he described to him. 22 years on, he sends agolis, meaning wagons, and somehow that's a hint for Egla Rufa. Nobody even wonders why that. To me, this always bothered me, but I'm weird. He didn't send calves, he sent wagons. How do wagons come to calves? It's the same Hebrew letters. And Yosef, Yaakov's face lights up. Just, wow. He is alive. He really is alive. But as Rashi points out, what Yaakov Avinu says is, he's not only biologically alive, he's the same tzaddik that I taught some 22 years ago. And that is incredible. I remember reading, there was a Jew by the name of Elichai Maltes. He was very close to the previous Rebbe. He was like a best friend. He was a chassid, he was very close to the previous Rebbe. When the Rebbe got married, our Rebbe got married, he was the Rebbe's shomer. He slept with the Rebbe for the couple of days leading up to his wedding. Elichai Maltes was in his 50s, the Rebbe was 26, and he was his roommate for the few days leading up to the wedding. And he wrote two long letters, to his children still living in Russia, describing the wedding. Anyway, this Rebbe Chaim Altos was from a city in Russia called Nikolaev. Okay, Nikolaev is in the Ukraine. Our Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. He left Nikolaev at the age of 7. So Nikolaev people had a certain kinship with the Rebbe. The Altos, as they say, used to push it, hug him and kiss him when they would come to see him. As to push it, boyhood friends, they grew up together. The Rebbe left Nikolaev at 7. Rebbe Lechaim was a generation older than the Rebbe. In other words, the children of Rebbe Lechaim were the Rebbe's contemporary, but Rebbe Lechaim and the Pinchas, there were two brothers, were adult men watching this little boy grow up. And they all remembered what kind of wunderkind it is gewesen. The Rebbe as an infant, as a little boy, was so extraordinary. And in this letter, which Rebbe Lechaim writes to his family, there's a lot of musings. There's a lot of him thinking, writing what's going on in his head. He spends these days with this, he calls him repeatedly Mendel. And he says, we all remember the pure, innocent, bright, wide-eyed Mendel. This Mendel has gone through much. He's gone to university, he's gotten an education, he's become a worldly man. I'm wondering, is it the same Mendel that I knew as an innocent little boy in Nikolaev? And then he proceeds to describe how the Rebbe prepared himself for his wedding. And then he writes to his son living in Russia, he is the same Mendel. He hasn't changed an iota. And who knows how eventful this wedding is? He writes, who knows how much of our destiny, our future, is entangled with this day and this marriage? And of course he was right. He wrote this in 1929, 28, when Rebbe got married. Who knows how much of the future of our communities? He didn't speak about the whole Jewish world, because he could not have imagined that there would be a Holocaust and the Rebbe would become everybody's Rebbe. So he speaks about him in the sense of Anash, or Lubavitch Chassidim. Who knows how much of our future, the future of our children and our grandchildren, is bottled up in this young man. But Yosef HaTzadik sends his father the wagons, and he alludes to the Egla Rufa. And Yaakov Avinu goes out of his mind. Yaakov Avinu, Oid Yosef Chai. Yosef asked his brothers, Ha'oid Avi Chai, is my father still alive? And now Yaakov Avinu declares rhetorically, he's alive. But he's alive, you understand? He's the same Yosef. Okay. So look inside. Let's read a little bit. Vayares ha'agolos ha'shesholach Yosef. Yaakov Avinu sees the wagon that Yosef sent. At the beginning, 2:22. Vatchi ruach Yaakov Aviyem, and Yaakov's spirit comes to life. Isa b'medrash says the medrash. I'm reading only the underline. Shezeh ha'yasimin. This was an indicator. Shesholach Yosef Yaakov. Yosef HaTzadik sends his father Yaakov Avinu. That she'im lo yaman lem Yaakov she Yosef chai. If they're not going to believe, he's not going to believe them. He gave him a sign. Yomer they should tell their father Yaakov Avinu she Yosef Mosa Leimer, that Yosef HaTzadik said, Tell him, B'shah shaparashni mimcha, when I parted from you, b'pashas egla rufa Yosef. We were discussing on the roof. And of course, the part of it that's so poignant is, they were literally walking in a field. And Yaakov says to Yosef, you see this field? What happens if you find a dead man murdered in this field? And the halachas of egla rufa. It's 22 years later, Yosef says, remember our last conversation. So that says, Vayeme Yisrael, Yisrael says Rav. Rav means, this is better than fiction. Oid Yosef b'ni Ichai, my son Yosef still alive. Says Rashi, Omer Yaakov is Yaakov Avinu. Rav keichesh Yosef b'ni. My son Yosef is stronger than I am. He's more of a Jew than I am. He has greater faith than I do. Shekama tzaras hiyu. How many tzaras did he go through? Vadayin hu emet. He's not only alive, but betzitke. He's still a tzaddik. Har baby many, much more than him, than me. And then the Rebbe discusses this exchange. And because of reasons of time, I'm going to be very brief. Part of what the Rebbe says is that when Yosef sent him the symbol of the Egla Rufa, it wasn't simply a technical thing. We happen to be learning about Egla Rufa. He sends him Egla Rufa to say, the concept is, the Jewish leadership have to worry about what's happening in the fields. It's their concern. They have to be wondering not only what's happening in the shuls and in the cities, the people out in the fields, which is both literally and figuratively, far away, is the concern of the Chachamim. And if someone is found dead in the field, which means spiritually speaking, a Jew who was lost to start with gets lost even further, they have a liability. In all of that, Yosef is trying to tell his father what he's been through. I was in the field. I was as far away from God as a person could possibly be taken, and he was 17. And I'm the same. So in Egla Arufa, in the symbol of this killing of this calf for the murdered man found without witnesses or evidence in the field, Yosef Asadik is saying the mitzvah of Egla Arufa puts responsibility on Chachamim to worry about Jews who were out there. I was the Jew who was out there, and I worried and I preserved myself. That's what he's telling his father. Okay? And Yaakov's response is to taste two things. Number one, he's alive, which is amazing. And number two, he's greater than I am. He's been in the worst kind of situations, and he's the same tzaddik. So the Rebbe, in the Sichos, wants to discuss this. And what the Rebbe says, I'm really skipping around. I underlined a lot of paragraphs, but I really can't. It's already beyond my time. So let's do this quickly. On page 225, the Rebbe says the following. The first underline on 225 reads, Hatam lazeh sheyosef hu arishan ribnei Yisrael she'ad l'Mitzrayim. The real reason, Yosef was the first of the family to go into Egypt. Moreover, v'zeh haya hasiba v'hahaschala li'eridas kol Yisrael l'Mitzrayim, and his being the first brought everybody after him into Egypt. Hu mipnei shayerida l'Mitzrayim, because going into Egypt shayachas l'chidush hamayuchat shel avedis Yosef. It's especially significant for Yosef HaTzadik. Why? Because Yosef represents the idea that a Jew can be in Golus and be a Tzadik. Yosef goes first because Yosef has the capacity to be in the darkest of environments with the least of support and remain a Tzadik. That's the first thing. Now turn to page 226. There's something else. The first underline, to be sure that Yosef goes into Golus and remains a Tzadik doesn't yet tell you who Yosef is. What Yosef is truly special about is that Yosef is Meloshan Heisafa. The word Yosef means to add. In other words, Yosef Hashem li beinachet, to make someone who is an outsider into a child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, Yosef has the capacity to transform even darkness into light, evil, Egypt into good. So Yosef tells his father both of these things. Not I'm alive and I'm religious. No. I'm alive and religious, and I'm changing my environment. So the two messages that I send from Yosef to Yaakov is not I'm alive and I'm frum. I'm alive and I'm frum is one message. But I, a single Jew, in a diaspora full of lowly, immoral pagans, I'm changing my world. And when Yaakov reacts, he's reacting to those two things. The first one is impressive. The second is overwhelming. Okay? Look on 226, second column. Yeshne Hevel Yisedi ben Shnei Inyanim Elu. These two concepts, that Yosef survives Golos and thrives in it, and that he changes his environment. And the Rebbe says, Aleph, Nesinas Keich of Bnei Yisrael, to give the Jewish people power to survive Golos. And Beis, Hashlita al Lunyani HaGolos, the ability to rule over the Golos, are different. What's the difference? So the Rebbe says in the next paragraph, the idea that you can survive Golos, every Jew has inside of himself the ability to be in a dark place and remain a Jew. The koyach comes from Yosef, but it becomes ours. Page 227 now. The second idea, that not only could a Jew be in exile and remain the same person, but he can change his environment, to dominate the goy, and to make him into a more moral and ethical human being. Only Yosef can do this. So, the two issues are, the first issue is that a Jew can go into Golos. Imagine, a kid survived the Holocaust. He's 21, 22 years old, and he ends up in Australia. No father, no mother, no brother, no sister. And he needs to buy bread. So he needs to find a job. And he's at everybody's mercy. He doesn't speak the language. And he remains through. And after months or years, he bumps into other from people. And everybody else is in the same situation as he is. But some of them are married, some of them have families, some of them are older, some of them are more experienced. If a kid came to Australia in 1946, he was 22. That means when the war started, he was 16. And then this man grows up and gets married. You're dealing with a tzaddik. I'm thinking of an individual person that I know who, that's exactly what happened to him. He was a simple man, he was clean-shaven, David and Shul. When you heard his story, you said, that's impossible. He wasn't a Lubavitcher, doesn't do the Lubavitch community, survived alone, came to Australia, remained from, married a daughter of one of the big Lubavitcher Hasidim. Never grew a beard, but he was a big Italian than all of his children who had beards. Why? You know what it means? To be 16 when the war starts, to be 22 when the war finishes. You have your past is gone, it's erased. And you remain the same person. That's Yosef HaTzadik. That's only the first characteristic. That's a characteristic which Yosef gives us. The second is to change the environment. To change the goy around you. That is exclusive. Only Yosef can do that. When Yosef HaTzadik sends his father the wagons, and they're a hint for the Yegla Arufa, he's telling his father these two things. I've survived, I'm thriving, and I'm changing my environment. And Yaakov says, I can relate to the first. I can't even relate to the second. It's way above my pay scale. Yaakov says about his son, who left the house at the age of 17. Look at the bottom of page 227. Ha'inyan harishain, the first idea. Vayares ha'golas ha'shalach Yosef 228. Now he sees the wagons. Her le'yankiv she'Yosef oimid b'tzitke gam b'mitzrayim v'tchiruach Yankov. Tells Yosef, Yaakov Avinu, not only is he biologically alive, he's spiritually alive, which is incredible. Says the Rebbe, V'rein zeh inyan shel chidush kol kach b'niyah le'Yankov. Yankov says to himself, I did the same thing. He didn't do it when he was 17. He did it when he was 63. But he did the same thing. Or 77. What happened? Sharigam etzlei metzina de Gumas. We find something similar. Shayachov shara beis Lavan Aram. He was 20 years in the house of Lavan the thief, and he survived. Yosef left home at 17. Yaakov left home at 63 or 77. I think there's a difference between leaving home at 17 and 77, right? I think so, yeah? Nevertheless. But ha'inyan ha'sheni, the second idea, Yosef nasa shalat al kol mitzrayim. Yosef takes control of Egypt, and not he controls the business. He teaches them morality. He makes them better people. Zehu chidush gam l'gabei Yaakov. Yaakov says, I can't. That's amazing. That's just, it's easy to say. But yes, Yaakov is so happy to know he's alive. He's so happy to know that he's frum and he's ready to go to Mitzrayim. He makes another declaration. He says, Rav, there is something in the story which is bigger than me. Oy Yosef b'ni chai. My son is alive on another level. On what level is my son alive? Shekech eshe Yosef, hurav ahabe many. It's more than I can fathom that he can change the environment in which he lives. So the Rebbe says, Yaakov is going to Egypt. He's going to be with his son. And of course the greatest thing is the celebration of his survival. And Yaakov says, his survival is incredible. It's impressive. There are things about his survival I can relate to. And there are things about his survival that even I cannot imagine. I don't know how he did it. That's what the Torah is telling us.
What I'm trying to say is, it's the whole point of shlichus is to change the environment. So
fine, but the point of shlichus is you have a mishaleach. Somebody sent you on shlichus, and the person who sent you on shlichus is involved with you on the shlichus. Yosef is lost to his family. They think he's dead.
No, but it says here that we can't do, like, it's not in our power.
Right. Yosef is the Rebbe. Yosef's not the shliach, he's the mishaleach. What it says here is, it's not in our power. The second point is, Yosef becomes the Rebbe. And when you go on shlichus, you can draw strength from the Rebbe, but it can never become your own. If you become disconnected from the source, you'll lose that second level. That's what the Sikh is saying. The first level can be yours. The second level requires constant connection to Yosef. Okay?